Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapters 4 through 6. This is the third sermon in the series. We've said that Ecclesiastes is divided into five different sermons. Sort of hard to see where some of these begin and end, but I think that we have this right. We're looking now at the third sermon. Notice that's right in the middle, enjoying the journey. There's an emptiness in wisdom, and instead of being fearful, enjoy life while it lasts because it's a gift from God. That's what we're headed to in this presentation. So notice the flow of thought, and it's really sort of the same. Now, I haven't mentioned this before. I'm getting this from Robert Miller the second. Um, the same pattern moves in each sermon where we begin where he sees or observes, the preacher observes something, he sees something. Next, he remembers the traditional wisdom about that, and then he reflects on the contrast of what ought to be in the traditional wisdom. If this was a proverb, this is what it would say, versus reality. Sometimes reality doesn't match up with the proverb. Think about the times in the Proverbs where it says, "Train up a child in which he shall go, and he won't depart from it when he's old." And yet we know children that were brought up correctly, and instead they went in a very different direction. So there are exceptions, and Ecclesiastes is taking us on a tour of those exceptions. However, that's not the end of the story. At the end, each time there's going to be a conclusion, and the conclusion will point us back to God. Even though the world doesn't seem to work the way we think that it should, we're always going to come back to the Lord. So, chapter 4, verse 1, then I looked, here's that observation part. So I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being under the sun. The down here, when I say under the sun, that's the down here life as opposed to the life in the heavenlies. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed. If there's oppression, there's somebody that's receiving that oppression. That's the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. Notice we have oppressors, and oppressors oppress the oppressed, and so you've got people that are being oppressed. The oppressors have power on their side. The oppressed have no one to take their side, and so all they can do is receive the oppression. Now, what's missing in this person's life? You say, well, power. Well, maybe that's part of it. Look at verse 2. So I congratulated the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living. And notice, so that this is actually taken from the previous verse. Here's the conclusion. There are those who have now died, and he says, at least you're not being oppressed anymore. That whole terrible cycle has ended. I congratulated those who have now died. Notice they are better off than those who are living today. The ones that are living today, they're still getting oppressed. The ones who have now died, they don't get oppressed anymore. Three, but better off than both of them is the one who has never existed. So you've got those who were never born, um, one who's never existed, who's never seen the evil activity that's done under the sun. So they never experienced that, and they're better off than the ones who have now died, who are better off than the ones who are still alive to receive that. Verse 4, I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry, competition between a man and his neighbor. And let me just confess that when it comes to things like sports or games, I enjoy competition. Back in my college days, I picked up karate, and then many years later picked up fencing. And I really enjoyed. Actually, the last time I fenced, I had a heart attack, and that was the end of that sport. But I really enjoyed it while I was able to do it, and it was great fun. And at other times, I played the game of chess. Enjoyed that, the competition involved. But this isn't just talking about games. I think, notice every labor and every skill which is done, that in the working world, oftentimes there's competition, notice, between a man and his neighbor. And the gatherer, uh, our friend, the preacher, he says, this too is vanity and striving after the wind. So this whole idea of rivalry, and by the way, the Hebrew word rivalry, and this is what it means, can kina. And kina, when you look at the usually translated either jealousy or envy, and rivalry works, but all of these things sort of work together. Notice the term sounds a little bit like Cain. And it's written a little bit like Cain. Makes me wonder if that's where the term comes from, or if there's some sort of word association between the two. I'm not sure that that's the case, but it certainly sounds like it. Sort of reminds me of the Cain and Abel story. We're going to see some reminders here from earlier Old Testament stories. Well, this too is vanity and striving after the wind. Because, well, first of all, there's always somebody better, and just trying to beat out somebody else in competition. If that's your life's work, that's it's just not enough. Uh, and you may win, but you still lose in the end. Somebody said it this way: the one who dies with the most toys wins, but the one who dies with the most toys still dies. And it's striving after the wind. It's emptiness. Verse 5: the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Now, notice that phrase, he folds his hands. That's actually taken from a couple of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 6, verse 10, and also Proverbs 24 and verse 33. A little sleep, a little slumber. Here it is, a little folding of the hands to rest. And that's describing the sluggard, the lazy person. And the lazy person is a fool, and you can have other kinds of foolishness besides laziness, but this is one type. And so that folding of the hands to rest, that's pictured here. And we have the idea back in the previous verse. There was the look of jealousy with a man in his neighbor, where he was trying to outdo rivalry between the man and his neighbor. Here in verse 5 is the man who's only concerned, really, he's not worried about his neighbor. He's not worried about trying to beat his neighbor. He's not even worried about trying to beat himself. He's lazy. He's given up on it. He folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. I put here he's only concerned about himself, but he's not really even concerned about himself. He's in that mode of in the lazy mode, in the lazy zone. The I'm not doing anything about it. I'm checking out. And then to verse 6, one hand full of rest is better than two fists full of labor and striving after the wind. So verse 4 was the man who was all about competition. Verse 5 is the one who checked out of any competition. And now here in verse 6, he's got one hand full of rest, and yet that's better than two fists full of labor. You can't call him if he two fists full of labor and striving after the wind. That's not lazy. Isn't necessarily jealousy. I think the point here in the one hand versus the two fists is that here's somebody who has a balance in life. He doesn't go after the two fists of labor. One fist is okay. In the other hand, he has rest. He knows that there's a time for rest, there's a time for work, and his life is balanced out. He's not lazy. He's not so competitive that he wears himself out. He's sort of in the middle. And that's a good thing here in this collection of 3 proverbs. So he's not the workaholic, but he's not the lazy person. Verse 7, then I looked again at vanity, remember emptiness, avel. I looked again at vanity under the sun. And there was a certain man without a dependent, having neither son nor a brother, yet there was no end to all his labor. So here's a further look at this workaholic. And in this case, he's doing his workaholic thing, not because of family, not to pass it on to the next generation, because there is no next generation. And yet there was no end to all his labor. Like, what? Why are you still pushing yourself to that extreme? It's not saying why are you working at all, but why are you pushing yourself to that extreme? Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, and for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is vanity, and it is a grievous task, and working just for the sake of working. Now, if it's something you enjoy doing, then go do that. That's great. But if it's working just to make money, so that you're not enjoying it, you're doing it just to succeed, but there's no real enjoyment in it anymore, then what's the point of all of that? You ask the question, for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? It's not for me. There is no next generation. Why am I doing this? Verse 9. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. So if now notice in the previous verse there was nobody else. So he's just working for himself and that's it. Here, two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. And so here I'm calling this the power of two. And they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. So both in labor and in falling, but woe to the one who falls when there's not another to lift him up. It's good to work together. It's good to be companionable for some folks. For some folks, in my case, my companion is my lifelong companion, my wife, and we have worked together in all sorts of things. And when one when one needed the encouragement, the other one was there, and that's a good thing. Verse 11, furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? So in labor, in falling, in warmth, verse 12, and if one can overpower him who is alone, two can resist him. So in labor and falling in warmth, and also in combat, in resisting that which is attacking. Notice how it doesn't end there. The last line, a cord of three strands is not quickly torn apart. So it's not just about two, it's the power of community. This reminds me of a line from the Gilgamesh epic, that ancient document before actually going back to even the writing of Genesis, um, this ancient epic. And there were two characters there, Gilgamesh and his best friend Enkidu. And notice what it says, look, Enkidu, two people together will not perish. A boat made out of reed bundles does not sink. Notice it's not the reeds, it's the bundles, the fact that they're working together. No one can cut through a three-ply cord, reminds me of what we just read. Water cannot cover a man standing on a wall, if he's got help. Fire in a reed house cannot be extinguished. Again, the reeds, because they are individually working together. You help me, and I will help you. What can anyone do against us? And so notice the power of us. If as long as we stick together, we can do, and the idea here is that we can do anything. Back to Ecclesiastes, verse 13, a poor yet wise lad. And now we're entering into a new segment. This time, instead of the power of one or of two or three, you have a poor yet wise lad. And notice he is, I put young because he's a lad. Wise because that's mentioned, poor because that's mentioned, is better than an old and foolish king. So I've got a young, wise, and poor person versus somebody that's old, foolish, and he's not poor because he's a king. Kings aren't poor. But the problem with our king, who no longer knows how to receive instruction. So here's a king that doesn't receive instruction, as opposed to a young, wise, and poor lad. And notice that for he is the lad, not the king, for he has come out of prison to become king. So you wait a second, is it the king that's come out, or is this a second person? Notice, read the rest of it, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. So here's somebody who comes out of prison and rises to the kingship, rises to leadership, as opposed to the poor foolish one. And when we begin to read this, wait a second, there's a lad who comes out to leadership. There's an old foolish king who hasn't been receiving instruction. And I have to pause and ask the question, does this remind you of anyone from earlier in the Bible? Because I think maybe, at least in part, it's supposed to. Does it remind you of a story? Think about that for a second. And the issue here isn't just, kings and lads, but the issue of popularity, because let's keep reading, we're going to see that. Verse 15, I've seen all the living under the sun throng to the side of the second lad who replaces him. Now, wait a second, are there two lads or one? Are there two young people or one? Well, the old foolish king started off as young, but now he's replaced by the young, wise yet poor lad. The NIV renders it this way: that all followed the youth, the king's successor. I think that just helps clarify this idea, and I think they're right. And so what happens is this young one becomes popular. Again, does this remind you of somebody who had been in prison and then rises to popularity, and everyone looks at, oh, how wise he is. The king couldn't come up with this answer, but this young one came out and did. And of course, by this time you're probably putting it together, that's the Joseph story. But that's not the end of the lesson. Continue into verse 16. There is no end to all the people, to all who were before them. There were people that were there before this took place, and there are ones who will come later. Notice, and even the ones who will come later will not be happy with him. With who? Not with the king, with the young, wise, poor guy who became popular but then didn't stay popular. And the point is that he doesn't necessarily remain popular. Does this relate to the Joseph story? Yes, it does. If you turn to the next page after the Joseph story, that will take you from Genesis into Exodus, you read right in the opening verses, and there arose a king, and presumably a people too, who did not know Joseph. Joseph and his people were popular until they weren't. And then that raises a whole new set of problems that maybe even taken us back to that oppressed and oppressors that we read in the previous section. Chapter 5, verse 1. New lessons. Guard your steps as you go to the house of God. So this is going to be giving us information and lessons about how we approach not kings, not popularity among people, but about God himself. That's what really matters, doesn't it? So guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. So if you can do one or two things: do I listen to God? Do I offer the sacrifice of fools? For they are not, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Not if they listen. Listening is good. If you're offering the sacrifice of fools, yeah, you might be offering a sacrifice, and instead of getting you in good with God, it's getting you, it's making you wrong with God. So this is temple language, a temple setting. When you go to worship, watch out what you're doing there. Watch out what you say. Maybe you better listen a bit instead of just speaking. So this is wisdom before God. Let's go to the next verse. Verse 2, do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. Be careful how you address the Lord, because he is God. So don't be hasty or impulsive, for God is in heaven and you're on the earth. Just remember your proper place. You're not there. You're not in charge. God is the one in charge. So don't be hasty in word or impulsive in thoughts. God is in heaven. You're on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Do not. It's not saying don't pray. I think praying is good, but don't go making promises to God that are beyond your, and I don't mean this literally, but I'm going to say it this way, that are beyond your checking account to pay. In other words, don't make promises to God that you can't keep. Therefore, let your words be few, for the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. That's an interesting turn of a phrase. So let your words be few. That speaks for itself. Watch out what you promise to God. Watch out what you. I think you can. I think you can speak to God. You can let Him know your desires. Although even there, I would say, echo the prayer of Jesus. Lord, this is what I want. Yet, not my will, but yours be done. uh, when you're asking God, I think it's okay to ask God for those things that you want, but say, Lord, you know best. Don't give it to me. Don't answer my request if it's not the best for your glory and for my good, which sort of go together. So notice, don't be doing many words. It's not saying that you have to keep your prayers necessarily short, but watch out what you promise God. Verse 4, when you make a vow to God, and this is going to be explaining this previous section. When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it. If you promise God that you're going to do something, do it. For he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. That's pretty simple. Um, verse 5, it is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Better not to make a promise to God than to make a promise to God and then not keep it. Make sure you're going to keep your promises to God. Now, in view of that, remember that one of the things I've done in the past, and first of all, I've been married for more than 50 years, um, and I have done weddings in the past, and I always tell the folks that are getting married, make sure that you're really going to do this, or don't get married. You're going to make a vow before God. And that's not a bad thing unless you're not going to keep it. So be sure you keep your marital vows. In fact, I remind people that the imagery of coming down an aisle as you come into do a wedding, the imagery is actually the imagery of a covenant. And in a covenant, what you were doing is you were putting a curse on yourself if you broke the vow, if you broke the terms of the covenant. So keep your covenant. If you're married, keep that covenant because otherwise, you're taking the part of a fool. Verse 6, do not let your speech cause you to sin. What does that mean? It means what we were talking about just in the previous verses. Do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Don't say, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Don't say it. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness. Rather fear God. So big idea. When you're speaking to God, make sure that you're saying the right thing. It's not that you can't lay out your heart before Him, but don't make foolish promises. Don't make foolish vows. Take God seriously, even when you pray. I think I'd say especially when you pray. Verse 8, if you see oppression, remember how we started with oppression and then we went to look at God and your relationship with Him. Now we're maybe coming full circle here. So if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official. Now notice this is oppression, but it's how we see it on the, in this case, when we're talking about officials, how we see it on the sort of the government level. When you see oppression, and did you notice that it tends to be the poor people that get oppressed by the government? I'm not saying that rich people never get annoyed by the government, but oppression usually starts with those in poverty. And notice, one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. Now, what's going on here is, let me just say, oppression takes place, and it doesn't necessarily start from the king. In fact, very oftentimes it starts with, well, can I say it? Corrupt officials with governmental workers. And what's more, it doesn't stop with just the low guy in the totem pole. Sometimes it goes up the ladder. So you've got one official watches another, and then there's higher officials. But it all comes down to the one who's ultimately responsible in government, whoever's at the top. Now, back in the ancient world, that was a king. These days, we vote for I'm not going to call them kings, but we vote for our leaders. At least in my country, they do. And that doesn't mean there can't be oppression. But as President Harry Truman said at one point, he says, in fact, he used to have, I'm told, a plaque on his desk that says, the buck stops here. That the guy in charge is the guy that's also responsible. And notice, after all, a king who cultivates the field, one who gets involved, who just doesn't leave things to his underling, but he actually he checks them out. He checks out his own officials to see, are they corrupt or are they honest? And somebody who does that, notice, is an advantage to the land. So a little civics lesson here. So is this talking about unjust officials? Is this talking about inefficient bureaucracy? But in any case, an active king is hoped to be the answer, especially if the king is wise and able to do what he ought to be doing. Verse 10, now we're going to wealth woes. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. Money is a poor, I'm about to say it, and it's sort of an interesting turn of the phrase, but I was about to say money is not a rich master, money is a poor master. It really is. Nor he who loves abundance with his income. This too is emptiness, is vanity, is Havel. And the point is that money by itself, you can buy stuff with money, but money by itself does not bring satisfaction. So he who loves money won't be satisfied, nor he who loves abundance with his income. So money brings no satisfaction. That's verse 10. Next, we see verse 11. When good things increase, those who consume them will increase. Did you catch that? So I've got increase and increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? When good things increase, those who consume them increase, and inflation, that's what we call inflation. You get more money, and then it takes more money to buy something because there is more money out there, and the price goes up, and you get a raise, and then you go to the store, boy, look what I can get with my raise, and yet you get there, and the price of what you were going to purchase, that went up as well, and no advantage. You can look at it, but that's all that happens. Verse 12, the sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. So notice the working man, he works real hard and he's tired at the end of the day, and so he sleeps, and that's described as being a good thing. And then that's contrasted here with the rich man who he didn't really have to work because he's already rich. And he has eaten and eaten, certainly quite a bit more than the working man. The working man ate maybe a little, maybe much, but he sort of worked it off. The full stomach of the rich man doesn't allow him to sleep, so work brings its reward, and the lack of it, well, it doesn't. Here's the rich man. He can't get any sleep because he's had so much to eat. Sort of the picture of indigestion, sort of the picture of there's no fulfillment. He's rich, but there's no satisfaction in his wealth. So riches bring indigestion, and they bring worry because you might lose them. The poor man's not worried about that. Now he might be worried about, can I pay my bills and things like that. But if notice, this is the working man. This isn't just the poor person that's out of a job. He's working, and maybe he didn't eat that much, or maybe he did have a nice meal, but it brought a certain level of satisfaction that the rich person didn't get to enjoy. Verse 13, there is a grievous evil, which I have seen under the sun. Riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. So here's somebody. This is another picture of that wealthy man, and he wants to hold on to his riches, so he's holding on to it. Verse 14, when those riches were lost through a bad investment, and he had fathered a son, there was nothing to support him. So here's the person who's hoarding his riches. He's trying to hold on to it. And yet those riches ultimately were lost. Something happened. Whether did the banks crash? Did he have it invested poorly? Whatever. And notice, and he had fathered a son, then there's nothing to support him. The point here is that riches don't always remain. So here's a person. He had his wealth. He tried to hold on to it. He failed. And at the end of the day, he failed. And in this case, notice he had fathered a son. There's nothing to support that next generation. Rich in the past doesn't mean rich in the future, and doesn't mean necessarily security. We actually have this term, social security. Not always secure. Take that for what you will. Verse 15, still on this riches theme, on these wealth woes. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, this is the rich person who then lost the riches. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor so that he can carry it in his hand, even if he didn't lose it before he died. Well, guess what? When he died, that's when he did lose it. Riches don't always remain, and even if they do up to death, that's where it ends. You can't take it with you. As somebody said, there are no U-Hauls behind a hearse. A hearse is a vehicle that takes away the body, and you can't take your money, you can't take your wealth with you. Somebody said, well, you can send it on ahead, but that's not really what we're looking at in Ecclesiastes. That's beyond the sun. We're looking at life under the sun. We're just looking at this physical life right now. So he's not going to take anything from the fruit of his labor. Verse 16, this also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus will he die. What does that mean? Well, think about when you're born. You can't see very well, don't have no teeth, you're weak, you're naked, you come in, they put you in diapers. And let me just say, if you die in your old age, you go out the same way. No teeth, can't see very well, you're maybe in diapers, and, and you didn't bring anything with you, and you don't take it either. So, what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Verse 17, throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger, and it eventually catches up to you. Something will take you out at the end, either sickness or old age or something, but you go out and you can't take any of it with you. Verse 18, here is what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life. Notice, it only works which God has given him, for this is his reward. So yes, eat, drink, enjoy yourself, um, as long as you recognize that this is from God. If you don't recognize it, that doesn't really connect. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself doesn't really do it. Remember how Solomon had tried enjoyment. He tried just to have fun until he brought God into the picture. It just didn't fill anything. But receiving it as a gift from God, that changes everything. It reminds me of a road trip that Paula and I, and also her brother, and the entire sort of extended family, did many, many years ago. Um, we packed up and we were going to go camping for 3 weeks up in the mountains of North Carolina. And that was great. However, we were going to camp our way there. And as we were on our way, we got, we camped in North Florida and in southern Georgia, and then along the coast in South Carolina. And by about the third day, I was grumpy and miserable and not enjoying it at all. And my dear wife said to me, Paula said, honey, what is wrong with you? And I said, well, we're not there yet. I'm waiting to where we can get there and finally have a good time. And she said, honey, enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey. And I thought about that. And right after that, I made a commitment to myself. I was going to enjoy not just the mountains, but getting to the mountains. And I said, okay, that makes sense. But then after that, I began to think about how that is a great way to look at life. I am one of those individuals who in the past have been very goal-oriented, both with the fire department and in life and in studying the scriptures and in teaching and also. But this idea of enjoy the day that God has given. It's not that you can't have goals. It's not that you can't work hard. It's not that you can't do these other things. Serve the Lord with all your might and strength and so on. But enjoy the day that He's given, which God has given him, for that is His reward. And I've sort of preached that to myself over the years. And I think there's a lesson that we see here in Ecclesiastes to enjoy the things that God has given as the gift from God. Verse 19, it's still on the topic of wealth. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, He has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labors. This is the gift of God. So if you've been given good things, if you've been given wealth, and maybe not even a lot, maybe just enough to get by and so on, but if you've been given that and you have been given the ability to enjoy it, that's a good thing. It's a gift of God. See it as such. Verse 24, he will not often consider the years of his life because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. If you're enjoying the journey, you're not worried about how short the journey is. Enjoy it. And you can do that, and that's a wonderful thing. Chapter 6, verse 1, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor. So notice this is a bad thing where God has given those things that we just talked about, riches, wealth, honor, so that his soul lacks nothing at all that he desires. So far, that's good. Yet, here it is, yet God has not empowered him to eat from them. Where God gives him those riches, but he doesn't get a chance to, okay, now that he's got them, he dies, and he doesn't get a chance to actually enjoy them. For a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. Think about when you talk about a foreigner coming, that's the picture of a king. And remember, Solomon, we're supposed to be envisioning him as the king. And he builds up this kingdom and leaves it to his son, who doesn't get a chance to enjoy it because it's taken away, because the kingdom splits, or because an outside king, a pharaoh, and I'm thinking of a pharaoh that actually did this, that came and invaded and took away a lot of the spoils. And that is vanity and a severe affliction. Verse 3, if a man fathers 100 children, now the word children is understood. It's not in the text, but that's why it's italicized. But I think that's the idea. He fathers 100 and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial. So he starts well, he's got all this stuff, but he never enjoyed it, and then died. Notice, does not even have a proper burial. Then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. He came, he saw, he got, but he never enjoyed it. It did not bring him any sort of satisfaction. Verse 5, it never sees the sun and it never knows anything. This is the person who dies before he's even born. It is better off than he. Verse 6, even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and that does not enjoy good things, it's not about the years, do not all go to one place. So notice he doesn't enjoy it. It reminds me of the words of Adlai Stevenson, a former vice president under Eisenhower, back around the time I was born. He said, "It's not the years in your life that count; it's the life in your years." Um, and there's a point there. It's not about how long you live. Did you enjoy it while you were alive? Don't forget to live while you're alive. Verse 7: all a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. Now, that term appetite, it's literally nefesh. Nefesh is, we usually translate that soul. Appetite works here. It's the things that you want. Notice a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. Just because you eat doesn't mean that it really satisfied you. Just because you partake of riches and spent them doesn't mean it really satisfied you. Verse 8, for what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? Just because you have it doesn't mean you know how to enjoy it. So notice that the issue, not satisfied. Verse 9, what the eyes see is better than what and here again, that same nefesh. This time they have translated the soul, but the appetite or the soul desires. This too is futility and a striving after the wind. So what you want versus what you get versus what you enjoy. Not always the same thing. Now this is going to introduce a new focus that's going to be picked up, because we're almost finished with this chapter. But it's going to be picked up in the next sermon. This is a little bit of a crossover, both these verses and even earlier in chapter 6, where it's looking at riches and enjoying the riches, enjoying the finances, getting the finances. That's not everything. And this will introduce a new focus that's going to be picked up in the next sermon. And I've titled it, What You Want. And so the Masoretic text, that is the later Jewish scribes that were copying the text after around 500 AD, they would put not only the vowel points, like you see in our friend Nefesh there, that tell us how we're to pronounce it, but they would put additional markers telling you where the break comes in a thought or in a line. And here they place the next three verses as the pivotal point in this section of the entire book. So it's for that reason I put the sermon break here. Initially, I was looking to maybe put it at the beginning of chapter 6, but I said no. I'm going to go with the Masoretes. Maybe they've seen more than I have, and so we're going to see that as the break. But this is actually going to be a little bit of a bridge. So we'll mention this next time. But let's continue reading the next few verses. Verse 10: Whatever exists has already been named. Now, how can it be named if it exists? Well, that's what happens. It comes into existence and it gets named. And it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. Now, notice the pronoun. So you got it is known what man is, for he, that is man, cannot dispute with him who is stronger. Who's stronger than man? Than he is? We're speaking of God. So this is a contrast between what man knows and what man is named, and then the stronger one, the stronger than he is. For there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? Um, Man's not the last word. Somebody said that man is the measure of who he is. Well, no, God is the measure of all things. And so, if you want to know what is the advantage to a man, go to man's creator and he will set you straight. Verse 12, for who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow, for who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Notice the question. You've got a man during his lifetime. He's going to spend them like a shadow. But the big question, who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? And so far, we haven't even addressed that question in Ecclesiastes, but now it's going to begin to be addressed. At least the question will be out there. What happens? What happens after death? And we're approaching that point. We're going to be looking to see the question of riches and power, but then we're going to ask the question, and death is a certainty, and what then? And the answer had not yet been clearly revealed as we're reading. Now, in the New Testament era, now that Christ has come and risen from the dead, that has been answered, but at that time it hadn't. And so you have to see the question mark there. So what we saw in this third sermon, chapters 4 through 6, we had the journey of life. We had that there's an emptiness in wisdom. And at the end, instead of being fearful, enjoy life while it lasts because it's a gift from God. So that we saw that life can be hard, that people can be even harder, those oppressors that we talked about early on, that there are those one another principles, and life goes better when you're in the fellowship of companionship. It might be marriage, it might be some other fellowship, it might be, well, for us, it's the church. But those one another principles, and then a call to fear God in your words, what you say, and in your oaths. Remember, we had that warning, don't make any foolish oaths before God. And then we address this question of wisdom and wealth, which is going to actually go in. The wisdom part is here, but the wealth part is going to go into the next sermon, into the fourth sermon. And the final charge to enjoy what God gives. So that's going to take us through the end of the third sermon. Next time we'll be in the fourth sermon, where we'll take a further look at those questions of wealth and power, and where does it take you? And as we've already seen, by itself, it doesn't satisfy. By itself, it does not satisfy.